Hi guys. Okay, so this is video 2 in chapter 2 of the 81 months of the Dao De Jing. We're doing chapter 2 for the month of December 2025. We did chapter 1 in November. And in the last video, we looked at the chapter 2 in general. We got the basic idea of its meaning. In this video, I want to use Nan Huaijin again. He was a famous Buddhist scholar, but he wrote a lot about Taoism. And his ideas about the opening passage of chapter 2, which is about how um, appreciation of beauty as beauty causes ugliness, right? Appreciation of skill as skillful causes a lack of skill, and so on and so forth. In this passage from his book, Laozi Ta Shuo, uh, then he is taking aim at Taoism, and he's pointing out some area of Taoism which is hypocritical, or at least from his perspective is hypocritical. Now, I just want to say that I don't either validate or invalidate his position about this. I am really interested in looking at different thinkers and their positions about the Dao De Jing in order to try to understand the text better. But I do think that we have to take him seriously, and the things that he says are very, very interesting. Okay, so let's get into what Nan Huaijin says. I'm going to read it to you, and I'm going to give my interpretation. Of course, my interpretation is going to be extremely limited, and I encourage you to also, do your own digging should you be interested in this subject. Another thing, if you are a member of the Taoist clergy and you feel that this is unfair, that's fine. Of course, we all have our own understandings of this, and again, I don't necessarily take this as my opinion per se, although I'm very, very interested in what he has to say. Okay, so it says 修道的人, people who cultivate the Tao, 大多数, mostly, 都把道的境界, they take the environment or the dimension of the Tao, 先有自己的主观观念, then they actually have their own preconceived notion and concept about what the environment of the Tao is. 建立起一个至真至善至美的构想, and they build up a vision or a representation of it, which is the most true and the most benevolent and the most beautiful, right? They create an idealized vision of what the Tao is. 也可以说自己首先建立起一个道的环境，妄自追求, right? So you can also say that they establish their own hallucinatory environment of the Tao, and they madly or they preposterously chase after it, right? So what he's saying here is people who cultivate the Tao have a problem, which is that they start from conceptualizing the Tao rather than treating the Tao as an unknown. And this is really against Taoism, right? If you think about the principles that are set down in the Dao De Jing or Zhuangzi, right? This is a school of thought which is based on an essential unknowing that's at the center of everything. And so how can you have the Tao as this ultimate concept that you're chasing after through all your practices? Be honest, right? If you do practice Taoism, you're probably chasing after the Tao. How can you do that and say that you take the Tao as a concept seriously, right? This seems really counter to the principle of Taoism. So this is what Nan Huaijin is trying to get at. And I'm gonna, do a big mea culpa here, right? Because I'm not an ordained Taoist, and I don't have any dog in the fight about the Taoist religion. I'm an internal alchemy practitioner. And internal alchemy, we're working toward a specific goal, right? You want to fortify the original life essence and energy of the body and build it up so it's robust and you achieve longevity. And you also want to reveal the original nature of consciousness and become enlightened. And then beyond that, maybe there's even more stuff, right? So we're who practice internal alchemy or who practice Chan, right? Any of these things, even though you're not supposed to be chasing after this Tao concept, nonetheless, you find yourself chasing after it, right? So Nan Huaijin points this thing out, which is really true. I don't think that it has to be painful for us, but I think that we need to consider it as something which is worthy of speculating over, at least, because it's very, very clear that this wasn't the original intention in the Dao De Jing, right? The Dao De Jing isn't telling you to chase after the Dao. It's explaining to you that this thing is like totally inaccessible. You can only see it through its traces, but its traces can inform you about how to attain longevity, for instance, or how to run a kingdom well, for instance. And that trace, just to jump ahead a bunch of chapters, is in the concept of guigen, or going back to the root, right? The root is stillness. So if you return to the root after a time of activity and nurture stillness, then it will result in a positive outcome of the activity flourishing again, right? Laozi points out this is what plants do when the leaves fall off in the fall, right? He says there's this herbaceous outgrowth, and when that reaches its maximum potential, then it returns to the root and it nourishes itself in stillness and gets its life back, right? So this is the essential principle of Taoism. So if you that's just the way that nature works. That's the system of the qi in nature. And the Tao is the thing which is before all of that, right? It's the thing that creates that system. But the Tao itself, we can't chase after it. We can understand the system, which has the trace of the Tao inside of it, but the Tao itself, we can't create any kind of notion about what it's supposed to be like. And so I think this is what he's pointing out. He's not saying, well, you shouldn't meditate, you shouldn't cultivate the Tao. I think he's really saying, don't start out from the idea of attainment of the Tao, right? That which is attained can be nothing, even less than nothing, right? Because the Tao is beyond being, it's beyond non-being, right? And so there's no possibility of any kind of attainment there. So you shouldn't try to imagine the Tao as this ultimate kind of environment, right? I think every Taoist person would agree with this. The Tao is not the same as the concept of heaven, and it's not the same as the concept of God, right? So, now in that, like I think most Christians would also say that the God is ineffable, but nonetheless, right? The Tao isn't, for the most part, isn't considered a deity, and so I think that everybody gets what Nan Huaijin is saying, but then at the same time, it's also very difficult not to behave in that way because of the way that we train ourselves to cultivate, inwardly and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, I'll stop wasting so many words. Okay, so he says, 其实以存此念, actually, if you contain this thought, this way of thinking, this mindset, 早已历到太远了, right? So you would have already left the Tao and traveled away from it too far. If you're holding this kind of concept of the Tao as the perfect environment, ultimate environment, the most good environment, the most beautiful environment, right? This is already completely the opposite, right? So then he says, 因此老子 bian shuo, I think it said bian shuo, could be shi shuo. Anyway, so he said, Laozi said, because of this, Laozi said, 美之为美, right? Beauty for the purposes of beauty, 色恶意, that's already ugly. 善之为善, right? Skill or good for the purpose of skill or good, 四不善意, that's already not skillful, that's already not good. And so he's saying, look, this is like literally in the second chapter, at the start of the second chapter of the Dao De Jing. It tells you very, very clearly, right? If you're upholding the Tao as the ultimate, then that's major wei mei, right? That's holding up beauty for the good of beauty. If you're trying to cultivate the Tao in order to enter into the environs of the Tao, which is the ultimate good, then that's shan zhi wei shan, right? Using that which is benevolent or good, used for the purpose of benevolence or good, right? Ultimately, those things lead to ugliness, maybe frustration, not getting what you want, right? And those things lead to not being good or not being skillful, right? So you chase after this thing, and the harder you chase after it, the farther away it is. It's a very, very interesting idea, and you can find traces of that all the way back to the Dao De Jing and Zhuangzi. So anyway, that's what Nan Huaijin said in that little section of the book Laozi Ta Shuo. I thought it was really interesting and worth discussing, in our treatment of the second chapter. But naturally, we can't stop at Nan Huaijin. We have to read also what other people said too. So we'll do that going forward. And as always, all of this is just unearthing material. It's me speculating about it. I'm taking it seriously insofar as I want to learn the Dao De Jing in more detail. But at the same time, I'm also looking at it playfully, right? I don't want to take a final position about this. I don't think we need to be absolutist in our treatment of a book that's 2,500 years old, which itself has been mysterious and is meant to be mysterious, and which many people have speculated over for thousands of years. It's an enjoyable enterprise, and I'm happy to meet with a number of different opinions. And in the case of Nan Huaijin's opinion here, I can be a little bit humbled because I've been doing the golden elixir and all that kind of stuff for decades now, and you really have been chasing after it. I don't feel bad about chasing after it because the benefits that it's brought to me have been great. But at the same time, what Nan Huaijin says here, it certainly is. It's certainly something to consider. And when you're modeling your own inner cultivation practice, you can think about whether or not you're chasing after this idealized vision that you have in your head, or whether you have real practicable information, which I think ultimately is probably what he's pointing out, right? The information should be practicable. It should have a result which is tangible to you. And it shouldn't be chasing after some image that you're trying to go after. And I'll just say from the meditation perspective, you can never imagine emptiness unless you experience emptiness. And that's just part of the practice. Sometimes you feel like you're right on the precipice of some great realization and it doesn't come. But other times, you just sit down and you let go and it happens spontaneously. That's just how it is. All right, so see you in the next video, guys.